This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell & Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com.
Some members I know couldn't make it. We do have sort of a strict policy on attendance. So one member who has been missing some meetings, I want to warn member Mamdani, if you miss one more meeting, you are out off this committee. So thank you all for being here.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a WCNY podcast about power and politics in New York. And on this episode, we're considering how New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani is going to navigate the halls of Albany from Gracie Mansion in 2026 and beyond. So we're checking in with one of his allies here at the Capitol, Assemblymember Amanda Septimo, a Bronx Democrat who was part of the 2020 class that ushered Zohran to Albany and has been described by the New York Times as part of the incoming mayor's brain trust. Welcome to the show, Assemblymember, and thanks for making the time.
Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here.
Well, I mentioned at the top that you both came into the Assembly in 2021, but in a chamber with 150 members, how did you two end up connecting? Because you've talked about having a friendship for 5 years now. Was it primarily from the effort to secure debt relief for New York City taxi drivers in 2021, or did you develop a bond sooner?
You know, we actually became friends. The first time we met was before we took office. Some of us, we were the largest class since 1974, so some of us made an effort to kind of meet each other before we were actually taking office. And I can't remember when exactly, but sometime before we'd met and hung out. And it was really early on, actually, that we sort of formed a pretty deep friendship. You know, it feels like a lifetime ago now, but really early on into our tenure was some of the things happening with Governor Cuomo. The allegations started to come out, and we were all sort of in a place of having to adjust to this world and deal with these sort of unprecedented events. And so I think during that time, we sort of became close, but we really sort of solidified our working relationship during that first budget process. Zohran was actually one of the people who was in the Capitol sleepout that we did. I don't know if you'll remember that.
I do remember the nerds sleeping in the war room with their little tents and their little circle. I do remember that, yes. And I think Zach Williams
the first time we've been called nerds.
might have hung out with you guys for most of the night.
He did. That's so funny. I've been called a lot of things because of that, but nerd, this is the first time. But that was really probably the first time that we sort of really solidified our working relationship, though we'd been building a friendship before that. But I sort of came up with the idea of the war room and then sort of lost my stomach a little and was like, oh, should we? Is it a good idea? And Zohran actually helped me get all the way there. And we pulled in some folks and we kind of took off from there.
I'm interested that you bring up that experience of trying to move the budget negotiations through something that could be decried as performative and maybe not that serious, but I'm curious how you think about something like that in retrospect, and is that the type of thing that can still be effective in Albany?
No, absolutely. I think that Albany is a place where folks want you to believe that there is one prescribed way to do things. There's one prescribed way to govern. There's one way to advocate. There's one way to show up. But the truth is that that's not true at all. And I think the most power in Albany is found through creativity, through coalition building, and through doing things that people don't expect you to do. And I think that that's as true then as it is today, and will keep being true into the future. I think Albany likes to trick you into thinking that assimilating is the way to get things done, but I've found the opposite to be true.
Well, I want to talk more about getting things done in Albany, but sticking with the recent campaign, ultimately you came on board, if my memory is correct, after the primary, and I don't think it was necessarily a foregone conclusion that the Bronx Democrats would rally behind Assemblymember Zohran Mamdani, given how he got outperformed there in the primary. So what made you come on board publicly? And what do you think made the Bronx Democrats come on board? Was it as simple as him being the party's official nominee at that point?
Sure. I mean, I'd been helping for some time before that. If you that New York Times article that you sort of quoted came out before endorsements, which is interesting. And so I'd been helping for some time before that, and so endorsement was sort of a formality.
Wasn't most of that help though
but-
behind the scenes, or was there stuff? Were you publicly on board as well?
No, that was my first sort of public measure of support. I won't speak for the party, but I do think that an important part, you're right, there was no inevitability at any point in this process. And I think I do feel comfortable speaking for the campaign and that like no one ever took anything for granted. But I do think that at that point, the county just recognized the responsibility that comes with being the representative of Democrats in the Bronx, right? And having a Democratic nominee that was speaking to issues that people in the Bronx were resonating with people in the Bronx, and that made people in the Bronx feel seen. I think all of those things created the circumstances and the conditions for the party to say, okay, let's step up and support our party in the way that we're supposed to. And that meant supporting Zohran as the Democratic nominee.
So ever since winning the primary, there has been this expectations game that Zohran Mamdani has had to deal with. First with the general, it was you got to get 50%, or otherwise people say you're illegitimate. That if Curtis Lewa hadn't been in the race, you never would have become mayor. He hits that threshold. Now it seems like the threshold is, well, you're going to have to deliver results right away in 2026, which in the context of the state budget means the first 3 months of a new administration, or maybe a few extra months, depending on how the governor approaches budget negotiations. But I would argue that you've got a 4-year term, and given his pragmatic approach to campaigning, he's going to probably prioritize areas that might be more under his control and maybe shoot for more incremental wins in Albany. I'm curious, what do you think of this game of timelines and expectations that you have for Mayor Mamdani here at the Capitol?
Well, I want to comment on everybody else's. I think, again, this is similar to what I was saying before, where people want you to think that Albany gets to set the rules of engagement and this is how you have to be. And I think the same is true for the larger political class. There are these sort of artificial benchmarks that are placed in front of people as measures of success. But the reality is that a lot of these benchmarks are created by people who didn't think he could win the primary in the first place.
And people who want him to fail, too.
Correct. And so you have to take everything at face value, I guess, but you also have to take into account who the speaker is, what their vantage point is, and what their interests are. And so when someone's setting incredibly sky-high expectations for you, but hoping that you won't meet them, then you know they're not acting in good faith. And I think what Zohran's been able to do incredibly is surround himself with a team of people, and that team has grown to include over 1 million New Yorkers now, a team of people who want to see him succeed and who are working genuinely to make that happen. Now, I think with exactly what he's going to prioritize, you'd have to ask him. But with respect to the concept of incremental change, I think that Zohran is going to be a mayor who prioritizes delivering on the things that he talked about, because this is not only about changing the face of New York City politics in terms of its sort of function politically, but it's also, I think the campaign's effort is to restore people's faith in government. And an important part of faith in government is making sure that you actually deliver on the things that you campaign on. And knowing Zohran as a friend, I know that that's something that's important to him, making sure that the hope that he's ignited in all of these New Yorkers is not gone to waste by them feeling like this is another set of empty promises that are never going to come to pass. And I think that's the energy that you saw with people supporting him. And I think that's the energy and urgency that he's going to bring to the work, because the truth is these issues are not just a matter of convenience or campaigning. They are real life issues that are affecting people on a day-to-day. And I think you will see that urgency in the work as well.
Well, given your understanding of what's possible here in Albany, what would you advise a new mayor of New York City to prioritize, during the legislative session, during the budget process specifically?
That's a good question. I think if it were me, I would say I would continue leading with a clear voice. Obviously, this campaign has, I think it's no exaggeration to say that Zohran has immense power in shaping the position and the future of the Democratic Party in this moment. And with that power comes the power to influence how other parts of the party react. And I think when you're talking about Albany specifically, Albany is its own planet, New York City is its own planet, but they intersect in really important ways. And my advice would be to continue to harness that power, to harness that influence, to bring up the issues that are so obviously important, like taxing folks who are doing better. Taxing the rich sounds like a radical concept as a phrase, but the reality is we have an incredibly regressive tax system in New York, and it needs to be reformed. And we need to do whole-scale reform. But in the meantime, we certainly need to be asking folks who can afford, who are doing incredibly well, who can afford to do more, in this environment where we're heading into federal cuts, where who knows what's coming down the pike. It's hard to imagine the suffering that will be inflicted on people, but you don't have to imagine hard because it's coming on its way. And so in the face of all of that, to sort of take a posture to say, we're not going to do these obviously important things, I think is the wrong posture. And I think that that's a posture that we will see challenged. And I imagine that Zohran will play a role in that.
I really like the description you have of Albany and New York City being separate planets, because to hammer that home, there are people in his coalition, the 1 million who voted for him, who probably know their New York City council member. They might know their borough president. They have no idea who their state assembly member is. They have no idea who their state senator is. They don't
Correct.
know how to find Albany unless the Amtrak dropped them, right off at the Capitol steps. So given that backdrop, how does the Zohran mayoral administration channel all those people in a meaningful way so that they can be some sort of ammunition or support for his agenda in Albany?
Well, Zohran's an organizer, right? I wouldn't underestimate his ability to organize. I think he was organizing before he came to office, and I think you'll continue to see that show itself. He's continued to do that as an assembly member, and I think you'll continue to see that show itself when he's serving as mayor. And most importantly, I think Zohran's greatest superpower is that he's assembled an incredible coalition of groups around the city that organize every single day on issues that are important to New Yorkers every single day. These are a lot of the groups that we already get to do work with in Albany, but I think there's just going to be a marked difference. It really changes things when the mayor of the greatest city in the world is singing the same tune as you, saying that tenants need more support, saying that childcare is too expensive and we have to do something about it, saying that transportation should be funded like critically public infrastructure, not reliant on fares. That makes a difference in advocacy when you have someone with such a huge platform and tremendous influence and power singing the same song. And so what I think he will do is govern alongside folks who have been organizing and who have done this work on a regular basis to make sure that folks are singing the same song and that we're moving the needle for working people.
But a lot of those themes that you raised are ones that the de Blasio administration pushed for 8 years, and they had the support of a lot of the same institutional groups that came on board with the general election. And it seems like the difference here are those volunteers that he mobilized, that people that weren't previously engaged in politics at all and just turned out to vote. So how do you keep those people engaged, and how do you keep them engaged in a way that is productive moving forward? Because people have some thin skin here in Albany, and they don't necessarily like having people push them around. We saw it with the governor already. When people are chanting at her, she just pushes back reflexively. And I know that is not unique among state lawmakers, because we've seen assembly members jump off bills because they don't like that they're not getting enough respect as they see it. So how do you actually move those people forward in a productive way?
Well, first, I would say Zohran has been elected the mayor of New York City, not the king of New York City.
Sure.
And I think that will be an important difference, right? To recognize that when folks are working in coalition, that doesn't mean that you get to control them. I'm sure that there will be folks who go off script. I'm sure that not everyone will agree on the script.
You think members of the DSA might go off script? You're prepared to say that at this point?
But that's the truth,
Sure.
right? That it's New York and we all want the same things, but we all have different versions of how it should happen. And everybody's going to fight and push in the way that makes sense and feels genuine and authentic to them. And I think that's part of the beauty of organizing in New York. And I think ultimately there's a lot of trust in Zohran's vision for New York. And there's a lot of eager sort of energies to support that vision. Now, how it happens in practice, I think will be a job that the administration figures out. But I think we've seen incredible coalitions like HJ4, Housing Justice for All, that does incredible work around organizing in Albany and New York City, right? Harnessing that power, bringing it to Albany. So this is certainly not something that people haven't done before. But I think there is an incredibly sort of increased sense of engagement that we want to keep moving. But I think how that happens in terms of the ins and outs, you will see the organizing community come together and figure out how to make that happen. But I also want to sort of, you mentioned de Blasio and the fact that, maybe he was trying for a lot of the same things. So I think some of them are very different.
Okay.
I think what's also different is the rest of the world, right? You've got a different governor. You've got a very different legislature. You've got a different mayor, frankly. And I think all of those things are different in ways that are going to be extraordinarily consequential going into this next session. You've also got a different federal government. And so I think all of those things will be different in ways that really matter. And you'll see different results because of it.
For more than 100 years, the New York State Association of Counties has served as the united voice of New York's county leaders, fostering excellence in county government and advocating for sustainable funding and sensible legislation that protects local taxpayers and the essential services they rely on. Learn more at nysac.org. We're already seeing the left wing of the party ramp up their plans for legislative primaries, and putting aside a primary to the governor, how meaningful are the threat of legislative primaries to prompting legislative action?
You might have to ask someone. I came in through a competitive primary process, right? So I think my vantage point might be a little skewed. But, in terms of the actual action, there's so much for all of the articles and all of the sort of public discourse that happens on different issues. There is so much that happens sort of behind the scenes, minute to minute, things change. Some of it, you're right, is some members feeling attacked because a group decided to protest in front of their home, and that can stymie efforts on an issue. But it can also be many, many, many times, actually, it's that someone has some kind of personal connection to something or some personal experience related to an issue that is influencing how they view something and whether they want to support it or not. And so I think that primaries are more of a sort of conceptual threat. And they sort of, but I'd love to hear other people's take on this, really. But I think primaries have the biggest impact on the how things function, right? I think members are able to be heard more. Members are able to sort of push further on issues, depending on where they are in a primary, right? There's pressure to deliver when you have a primary that's coming up. But I don't think that it really necessarily helps on particular issues. There's probably one or two examples that I can name where that sort of is the exception. But for the most part, I don't think primaries themselves make a difference in policy per se, but I think they have an influence on how the place functions.
So that's kind of the stick approach. There's also, we'll call it a carrot, and I read, and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, La Página de Nueva York, that was
great.
Okay, excellent. My high school Spanish teachers will be proud.
Yeah, proud somewhere.
Yes, I think they're still alive. That you were the architect of the Mamdani campaign's Latino vote outreach. Is that a similar role you might play in the Capitol, being the Latino lawmaker, whisperer, especially for more institutional or conservative Spanish-speaking lawmakers? Because while people upstate think everybody of color is a progressive lawmaker, that's not actually the case, and you might have more conservative Democrats. So is that something that you're taking on or planning on taking on in 2026?
I don't know that it's that you take on anything so intentionally. Okay. I think the most important thing that I always try to impress on everyone, and the campaign just really took it in, is that Latinos are regular New Yorkers. Latinos have housing insecurity issues, food security issues, care about jobs, care about good schools in the same way that every other New Yorker does, but need to be communicated with directly. And sure, the Latino community has its nuances like every other community, and different parts might feel different things about different issues, but that's true for every community. And so I would never call myself sort of a whisperer or anything of the sort. I'm just a woman who represents Latinos and wants to make sure that our community is being taken into account at every turn. And I'll tell you, I'm also of Black, and being both Black and Latina allows me to sort of see the ways in the ways in the communities, the ways in which our communities are sort of treated differently politically, accounted for differently politically. And I think that's represented in sort of the imbalance in leadership that you see right now. We have incredible Black leadership at all levels of government, and that's amazing and has really served the Black community well and moved the ball forward in really important ways. You see things like reparations studies that would have never happened if we didn't have really strong Black leadership in Speaker Hastie and Leader Stuart Cousins. But that can't be said for Latinos right now. And so I really think that what I hope everyone will take in and what I will sing in 2026 and beyond is that the Latino community, there are 4 million Latinos who call New York State home. It is a community to be taken into account in a meaningful way, beyond sound bites, beyond kitschy little parts of the campaign, but in meaningful, thoughtful ways at every turn. And that's what I'll keep sort of driving forward.
Well, because you mentioned leadership and that thoughtful pitch, I'm going to jump to one of my final questions, which was, when there's a vacancy in the Assembly Speaker position, are you going to throw your hat in the ring in the future? Because I think of you as one of the dark horse candidates, maybe if it became open in 2026, but maybe a more favorable or prominent choice in 2028 or 2029.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. That's the first time I've gotten that question this publicly. It's really not something that I've thought about. I don't anticipate that Speaker Hastie has any plans to move on. And I always think that it's premature to start sort of lining things up when we know, especially my last 5 years in Albany, have really shown me that things can change overnight in ways that you can't even possibly imagine or plan for. My political career as is has gone different than I planned. And so I'm open to opportunity, excited to embrace leadership opportunities as they present themselves. But right now I'm focused on being a good assembly member, and that means getting to Albany and doing good work.
Well, how do you envision yourself then helping the Mamdani agenda in 2026? What do you think you can do as a member, as a Bronx Democrat, to make the agenda more successful?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so Zohran and I worked really closely together when he was in the assembly. And I think it's doing the same things that we did, but continuing to do that with all of our colleagues that we did it with. Zohran just won't be there now. But that means working in coalition and making sure that we treat each other with respect. I think there is a really big temptation in Albany to sort of place more weight, if you will, on some members that come from certain kinds of districts or have a certain proximity to the speaker, if you will. But the truth is, the assembly is a consensus building body. And as much as I think so many of us could wish that were different sometimes, it really is the truth. That is a place where for people to thrive, for policies to move through, the assembly builds consensus. And so the way to do that is to be talking to colleagues, working to understand their districts, their perspectives, their red lines, their political dynamics, all of those things, and getting to solutions that everybody can live with, and hoping that that moves the ball forward for your community. And that's really the fight that we're waging on it daily. And I think that's the work that always happens, and it's the work that will continue to happen. As a supporter of the incoming mayoral administration, I will make sure that we're doing what we can to create the space and opportunity for them to deliver on the issues that are clearly important to New Yorkers who have spoken with a clear voice in this election. And again, that means listening, working in partnership, and building coalitions with other members.
Well, when building coalitions, aside from the people who might be natural allies for the new mayor, where else do you think you can find some partners? Upstate, there are members who are already going around, "Oh, don't worry, he can't do all the things that he's saying. It's fine. Everything's fine." So, I mean, do you write those people off automatically? Where do you find partners so that when you're having conference, you can get to 76 Democrats on an issue?
I wish the number were that simple.
Sure. And then some wiggle room too. Some wiggle room too.
Very easy.
Yeah. Touche. Carl wants it to be safe on the floor.
No, I think I'll give you an example. So a couple of years ago when we were working on the free bus pilot, that was a crazy idea at the time. We thought we this, we that, we did all kinds of things around it. But my role was sort of more internal. I did a few sort of public things, but my role was sort of internal, and we worked kind of in tandem as a team. And I think Zohran will tell you this. If you talk to the speaker, he'll tell you this. And we sort of, we dragged some folks along, and we were ultimately able to build the coalition that got it into the budget despite the MTA's objections. The next time when we were talking about expanding the pilot, as soon as budget began, there were folks coming up to us who didn't say one thing about the budget, the free bus pilot, the first round, who were like, hey, I want to help with the pilot, because they saw those free buses in people's districts, one of which was mine, which I was grateful for, and saw the results and suddenly wanted to help. That is the kind of work that I think needs to happen. And you will find unlikely allies every time, because one of the great things about representing New York City is that we get to do a lot of unprecedented things. We do get to sort of lead. And you see colleagues representing areas outside of New York City watching us create these models and knowing that those models can then be brought to their areas. And so it's not as sort of cut and dry as folks would like it to be, in terms of like, this person will be your friend because they agree with you on X, Y, and Z. No, some of my closest allies are folks who I think on paper people would think we're very different ideologically.
Like who? Name
and
them.
that's just Amy Paulin, a
Okay.
dear friend of mine. A dear friend of mine, a very close ally when
Also
it comes
very
to work.
a practical lawmaker. She's always building allies, has her notes, she's running all around.
Exactly.
So
A hard worker. Amen. But I think on paper, when you look at the districts we represent, people would think that would be sort of an unlikely friendship. But we actually, to your point, I think are both really practical lawmakers who just want to see things go well and go as well as they can for as many people. And so I think you'll see more of those coalitions form. And for the people who are in a panic, it will pass. We will be on to the new elections before we know it. And this will all be a distant memory.
Assuming comes up for it to testify, what is Tin Cup Day going to be like for a new New York City Mayor, Zohran Mamdani? Because it's not going to be all friends asking questions.
I think you will see that it actually feels like a homecoming. Zohran is someone who, even in moments of disagreement, he is very respectful. I know some terrible stories that maybe he'll write in a book one day, but they're very far and few between in terms of colleagues being prickly. It's always respectful in terms of the cadence of the disagreement. I can't speak for Republicans, but
Yeah.
I do think that you will see that. I can't speak for Mike Lawler. We could have a whole other episode on that. But I think Mike Lawler, who's also elected with us, that's why I mentioned him.
Took out Ellen Jaffe.
Right. So we could have a whole other episode on that. But I think even in terms of Democrats who sort of might be a little more nervous, I think I'm sure you'll be there and you will see that it feels more like a homecoming. People will be excited. He's really affable. He's really likable, even when you don't agree with him.
We've had some Democratic consultants on who say Governor Hochul needs a Mayor Mamdani just as much as he needs her. I don't know how true that is, given the fact that if the legislature does stick up for itself, like we've seen when there was a weakened Governor Cuomo in 2021, they can move the ball on their own. 2019 with a housing package. So what do you think of that relationship? And if you are Mayor Mamdani, are you trying to negotiate through the governor, or are you trying to just line up your people in the legislature and ensure that they're willing to go to bat?
I think if you're doing your work well, you're doing both. You're not leaving any bases uncovered. But in terms of whether, yes, the legislature has power and the legislature can always stand up and say, this is what we're doing. But we also are subject to the politics of the day. We also have elections coming up next year. And so if you harken back to bail, when you have a New York City mayoral administration that is spewing talking points that run counter to the agenda that you're putting forward, it just makes it harder. It is an outsized platform that comes with a lot of power to shape the political narrative in New York. And what happens in New York City reverberates far beyond. And so when you have the potential for someone to be an ally to the legislature who is advancing talking points that are aligned with some of the things that folks are trying to do in the legislature, it changes the conditions in which the legislature gets to function. And so whether the governor needs him as much as he needs her. I think that's actually a political discussion going into November elections. But with respect to the governing of it all, I think having an ally, at least for the legislature, who is more aligned with some of the things that we're trying to do and not do, right? There have been whispers of raise the age changes, etc. Having someone who's aligned with us will make a big difference just in terms of how the narrative is shaped.
Do we raise taxes in 2026?
I think we have to.
And do you think there'll be a push for it this year as opposed to say, hey, we can paper over the holes in the budget this year and 2027 is going to be the real problem?
I think we're in real problems now. And the push, if you'll remember, we were able to sort of get revenue raisers in the budget in that first year. It really, that year, by the way, now that I've spent more years in Albany, what an incredible year that was. But that movement started long before this sort of emergency situation we find ourselves in now. Because what was true then is still true now. We have people who can afford to pay more. We have needs in the state that need to be funded. Now, there are also probably places that we can sort of make adjustments. There are some tax credits that we could probably live without. But the emergency is here. It's at our doorstep. To kick it down another year, I think would be irresponsible. And I think you'll have a lot of folks saying that.
Well, we've been speaking with Assemblymember Amanda Septimo. She is a Bronx Democrat. Assemblymember, this has been a blast. Thank you so much. I look forward to more discussions in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much.